Hi and welcome to this tutorial on MIDI mapping in Ableton Live. So Ableton Live is not only a great tool for composing and writing music, it's also an amazingly flexible and creative tool for live performance. One of the things that is most appealing about the MIDI mapping feature of Ableton is that it means you can be free from the computer when you perform, and that's a really important thing for performers who are not used to being stuck in front of a computer. So Ableton Live allows you to utilize any MIDI-enabled device. So there are lots of MIDI devices available in the market nowadays, and many of these are USB devices. So a lot of the devices that are designed, a lot of the devices that are available are designed to work specifically with Ableton Live. The push controller is one such device, but there's lots of others as well. There's the Novation range of keyboards. I'm going to look at the MIDI keyboard today. And these are customized also to work with Ableton Live as well. It's also possible to build your own MIDI controllers, build your own MIDI instruments, and you can still use those with Ableton, and that can make your performance quite something unique and quite special as well. So what we're going to do today is look at the Novation Launch Key MIDI device. I like this one because it's relatively cheap, it's small, lightweight, and has some Ableton customization built in, which makes it very convenient to use. So the first step, of course, is to plug in your device. I've already plugged my device in here. And then we're pretty much ready to go. So the next step after you plug your device in is to set your preferences. So if you go up to the Live Preferences window and you click on the Link MIDI tab, you'll see these menus. So there's Control Surface, and when you click on that, it gives you a list of control surfaces that Ableton recognizes. So we've selected the Launch Key Mini because that's the one that we're using. You'll notice that with this one, it's quite specific. It's actually got two inputs and outputs. So one is specifically for the MIDI, customizable MIDI, and the other is for the non-customizable stuff. Okay, so we've selected our control surface, and the next step is to start mapping within Ableton. So what do we mean by mapping? Mapping is where you assign a physical controller to an element or function within your software. So when I press a pad or touch a key or a controller or play notes in my device, that is going to be controlling whatever I decide I want it to control. All right, so some of those things are already decided for us with the customized aspect of this controller. So notice when I played that keyboard just then, we heard some sound, which was a good sign, but just up in the right hand corner here, you'll see this little light comes on. That tells us that we're getting MIDI in. So if you don't see that and you're not hearing anything, you know that you have a problem with your MIDI connection. Okay, so instant mapping. So many devices will automatically be assigned to controls in Ableton, as we will see with the Novation controller in a moment. So this is very handy. It saves us having to go through and manually map every key to, or every knob to, a particular parameter or element within Ableton Live. So you can also manually override those instant mappings or those, locked in mappings. And you can also lock a device to a particular controller. So sometimes when you are using like a push controller, for example, when you go to a different device, it'll automatically remap those controllers on the push, which saves you a lot of time and effort. So let's have a look at some of these instant mappings on the Novation controller. So you'll see there's this little red light that's on here. That means that we're in the customized mode for the Novation controller. So we've got these pads, and they're basically mapped to the clip slots in our session view. At the end, we've got a little arrow, which is basically a play button, which means that it'll play the scene basically. And then you can zip up and down with these arrows. There's the scene arrows where you can move up and down. So let's just have a look. And the good news is that it's working. So you'll see there when I get to the scene 1, there's 1, 2, 3 of the pads light up. That corresponds with 1, 2, 3 clips in those clip slots. So if I press now play, the global one for the scene, it starts playing those particular, and they've turned green on my controller. Okay, now if I want to stop altogether, the little button below that one that I just pressed is actually automatically instantly mapped to the global stop button. So let's press stop and it stops playing. So let's move down to our next scene. If we want to play that, we can play that. And we can also stop and restart, stop, play those. So you can see how that in a live performance that will be much more convenient than mousing around to try and click on the different parameters there. Okay, so that's the instant mapping. But what if we want to override, or we want to actually, maybe we want to use one of these little faders here. You can see that fader's already mapped down the bottom to that controller there. And all of these controllers are automatically mapped. All right. So that's playing the old school Rhodes there. Now, you can see down here, down the bottom here. Now, what if we wanted to, see at the moment, that is mapped from 0 to 127. So that might actually be a little bit too loud for us. So what I'm going to do is actually to manually map a device, you notice that I clicked on this MIDI button. When I clicked on the MIDI button, lots of the elements within the session lit up. So that they're all the elements that are MIDI mappable. So it's it's almost everything really. And I'm going to select this one. And what I'm going to do is just wiggle the controller that I now want to control that. Okay, and you'll see when I did that it popped up in our MIDI mapping window here. So what I'd like to do is be able to turn that knob so that when I get all the way to the top, it's not going to be 6 dB, it's only going to be at 0 dB. So I'm just going to type in there and I'm going to change that to 0 dB. And then I'm going to jump out of MIDI, and you'll notice now when I turn that knob all the way up, it only goes up to 0 dB. So it gives you some fun. Okay, so let's have a look at the different types of MIDI messages that we can send from our controller. So there's usually two main types. There's a MIDI note message and there's an absolute controller message. So both messages send number information. So a MIDI note message will send an on-off message. So it'll send a 0 or 127. So it'll fluctuate between 0 and 127 to correlate with on-off. And absolute controller or continuous controller messages will send a range of values between 0 and 127. So typically a pad or a key will send a MIDI note message, and things like a fader or a pot will send continuous controller messages. Okay, so how do they then behave within the program? Let's have a look. So let's say we want to assign this clip slot. We want to trigger this clip slot using a pad. That will send a note on-off message, which will then trigger the pad to the clip to play. And this is of course also the behavior will also depend on the launch mode settings, which we'll look at in more detail. But at the moment we're just on trigger mode, but we can try toggle mode as well. Trigger mode will just trigger the clip when we press the button. So let's click MIDI, select just delete the previous selection, select the clip we want to assign, and then press our pad, and you'll see it comes up in our MIDI mappings. Turn it back off, and when we go into the launch key, we press play, it triggers the clip. Okay, so let's go and try that now with a pot. All right, so let's delete that assignment, and this time we're going to wiggle the pot. So now it's assigned to the pot. So what will happen is, depending on the position of the pot, that will determine whether the track is playing or not. So it's off at the moment, and then when we turn it above 64, so 0 to 63 is off, 64 to 127 is on. Okay, so let's try a similar thing with a volume control. All right, so let's go back into our MIDI. We'll delete those mappings that are in there, select the thing we want to map, and we'll assign this to a continuous controller, which will give us a nice smooth control over that volume. And you can limit it, like I did before, by putting the upper 127 being 0. Okay, so let's try that one now with a with a pad, and see what happens. All right, so I'm going to select that one again, and I'm going to hit pad 8. It's assigned. Go out of MIDI, and we're going to. Okay, so when I hit the pad, it goes to 127. I hit it again, it goes to 0. So that's a basic difference between MIDI note messages and continuous controller messages. Okay, so finally, some of you may be interested in building your own controllers, and so I thought I'd just show you a couple of mine that I have built and how I use them with Ableton. So it's pretty much a similar process. You bring the MIDI data in through the MIDI port. So I've built 2 different types of controllers. I've got an eMic, which is called the Extended Mic Stand Interface Controller. It consists of a microphone stand and a bunch of sensors that have been attached or retrofitted to the mic. So there's a joystick on the top, some slide sensors on the side, an accelerometer in the base, some switches, some distance sensors on the side, and what else? Some pressure sensors and so forth. And so I use a couple of different programs to bring or to convert the data off that device into MIDI. So you can use PD or Max, or there's one called Junction. And so you just set those programs up so that they output the MIDI, and then you put them, for some you might need to set up an IAC driver, and some just will have ports that you can use anyway. So, and then you just make sure that you've got remote on, just as you would with a off-the-shelf controller. So I'll show you a little bit of the wireless now. So this one is just mapped. I've mapped an accelerometer, which I would wear on my arm. I've mapped that to a filter here. And then I have a switch that enables me to switch that in and out. So I would just press my switch. First of all, I've just got a clip. I'll just play a clip so you can hear the effect of this. All right, and if I switch in my filter, and I move my arm, imagine I'm moving my arm, you can hear the filter shifting. So it can be quite a powerful way to perform, and gives you lots of flexibility and also a really nice visual element to your performance. So I'll work on some tutorials for the future in looking at building your own controllers, but for now there's lots to play with. There's lots of off-the-shelf controllers that you can use to perform with Ableton Live. Thanks for listening. See you soon.